Welcome to the Business of College Sports podcast. I'm your host, Christy Dash, the Sports Biz Miss. And today I am joined by Marty Ludwig. He is the Director of Trademarks and Licensing at the University of Cincinnati and someone that I have called upon numerous times to ask questions about licensing in the space of both university licensing and collegiate licensing. We are going to talk about how university licensing and intellectual property is managed both on the university side and on athletic side, how they need to work together going forward. And you know, I can't have a podcast without talking about the impact of NIL and how Cincinnati and others are approaching NIL from a licensing standpoint, the use of their intellectual property by student athletes, their current sponsors wanting to expand their partnerships to include NIL deals with individual athletes. We got into group licensing, all things licensing and intellectual property in this episode. Marty is an expert, and I'm so lucky to have him here to chat through some of the current issues in trademarks and licensing. So without further ado, here is my interview with Marty Ludwig.
This is the Business of College Sports podcast with your host, the founder of businessofcollegesports.com, Christy Dash. Find her on Twitter and Instagram at SportsBizMiss.
Marty, welcome to the Business of College Sports podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love getting a chance to visit with you again and talk about this industry and all we do.
Yes, you and I got to spend a little time together this summer with some of your colleagues from all around the company that work on the university side of licensing. I spoke at a conference you all had on the way NIL is impacting your industry, and we're going to get into that some today. And I know I learned a lot about licensing going to that, and I'm excited to have you come share with the audience, many of whom work in college athletics, but maybe don't work in licensing and certainly don't understand everything that has to happen at a university from a licensing perspective, both on the athletic side and on the university side. So excited to dig in on the latest happenings in licensing and intellectual property with you.
Yeah, love it. Again, it's more complicated than most people tend to think, and I love having the opportunity. Thank you for meeting with me and talk about this, to share a little bit more about the complexity of this business, because it's definitely a niche industry that has kind of grown exponentially over the last 30 years, and it's starting to really grow again with all the new changes that are coming in with NIL as well. So NIL and sponsorship activities and things like that, for sure.
And I know it works a little different. No two campuses are exactly the same, but can you maybe give everybody a high-level overview of what does licensing look like at most universities, and as far as licensing people on the athletic side and on the university side, and the way that's structured and the ways in which you all work together or could maybe work together better? What does that look like at most schools or at Cincinnati?
Cincinnati, my office is based in the administration and finance division. And that tends to be where more university licensing programs are gravitating towards. There are certainly still segments that are based in athletics, but more and more either based there in the development piece, auxiliary services and other levels from that perspective, because it is a revenue generating source for the institution. And they don't represent just the athletic identity, which sometimes is universities have one logo mark or one primary logo mark that covers all parts of campus. Like here at UC, we have different identities in our brand marks. So we have our spirit marks like our CPAW, things like that, and our mascot that is more of our athletic identity, whereas our institutional logos, our UC symbol, is more speaking towards our academic research kind of perspective for the brand. So it's interesting how different groups are spread out across the country, but more are outside of athletics than typically are inside. But with that said, we obviously need athletics as a lot of visibility for the institution. So it's important for the licensing folks to be engaged with the athletic department and the different teams to leverage that kind of engagement and that visibility, just like development officers do. You know, a lot of development officers are tied in really tightly with athletics, even beyond what they're raising revenue for athletics, because athletic events are great opportunities to engage the constituency, the wider community, businesses, donors from a variety of or organizations to come to campus and celebrate the university. So we're much like that perspective, where it's a good rallying point to celebrate the brand and the impact that we make within our constituencies.
So how does that work when a brand comes in and wants to work with marks that are maybe some marks from the university side, some marks from the athletic side? What does that really look like from a sponsorship perspective, when I'm sure sometimes the engagement starts on your side, on the university side, but sometimes it maybe starts on the athletic side as well? How does that all come together?
It's actually interesting. That's part of the challenges with our university partnerships group that we put together, is trying to help manage that growth of that business and that engagement, because on the athletic side, it's pretty standardized now. You've got a lot of multimedia rights partners that come in and they get contracts, and that covers certain parts of the IP of the institution. It's more the athletic identity, the athletic engagement pieces. The university partnership side is more everything outside of athletics. So whether it's companies that want to come in and get visibility for retention of employees, whether it's opportunities to create pathways for education, certainly recruiting students for the next pipeline of staff. There's also research angles that are related to that, and the research identity of the institution to help validate the businesses and what they're doing as far as sourcing, that it's been fact-based research that supports a drug development or a new technology that's out there in the marketplace. So there's significant value in affiliating with the university brand from that perspective. Then you lean into the wider community of an institution. It's beyond just the students, it's the faculty, it's the staff, and the multiplier effect of the families that are related to that. So the difference that we're making, we're touching the lives of literally thousands and thousands of people, and the impact that the universities have more broadly. It's not just coming to a game day, it's not just coming to teach a class. There are so many other things that are related to a university. They're small cities when you really think about it from that perspective.
And I'm sure this could be the entire episode, but maybe from a high level, what are a few of the biggest issues that you and your colleagues are facing right now?
I think the biggest challenge is just communication and getting unified support, because we are large organizations, and like any large organization, it's hard getting everybody to see the vision and work collaboratively together. Most people, and it's just human nature, you know what you know in your lane, in your own silo, as it were, and it's hard to kind of break those silos down and pull people together. When you look at it from a brand perspective, we're all stronger when we're one united front, and finding the right niche to make sure it's okay if I give a little bit on this side, that you're going to get better on that side, that collectively what's the best interest for the brand and the institution more broadly. So I think that's the biggest challenge, getting everybody to understand the bigger picture and what's in it for them, not just their individual unit.
How often are you meeting with or talking to folks who deal with licensing on the athletic side there on campus?
I'm regularly meeting with them. I have at least a standing monthly meeting with our deputy athletic director. He's my direct point of contact, but our AD is on our sponsorship committee. So that committee meets, that's that stuff for everything outside of athletics. We meet quarterly on that. So he's a member of the leadership team that meets with that group. I meet monthly with our GM from our multimedia rights partner. So we're making sure we're in touch with them, because how they work with corporate partners to engage with the university's brands, we're making sure we're consistent with that. I meet with our compliance director. Obviously, since NIL has come on, we're regularly meeting with those folks a lot, helping to make sure we're providing opportunities to educate the athletes on how they can best engage with their NIL opportunities. Because as you know, NIL is their NIL. How do you dovetail that in with the university's intellectual property and the university's brand, and make sure we're all able to do the same thing? And that's been a challenge for everybody throughout the years. We're all learning our way through this, because there's so many different challenges, different state laws, local laws, conference regulations, and things like that. Just that's the importance, again, back to communication and working together collaboratively to work our way through all of these opportunities.
Okay, well, you opened the door. You know I want to talk about NIL. I was going to wait a little longer, but you brought it up first, so I want to go there. You and I have talked about NIL from a number of different perspectives as it relates to licensing. Let's start with, and I know how it works at Cincinnati isn't necessarily how it's working at another school right now, but what is Cincinnati's current stance or process when it comes to student athletes who want to use university marks in their NIL deal? Say they want to wear their jersey for a social media promotional post. What is your current stance on that?
So the stance is we're open to them doing a lot of things to engage with their NIL and supporting them in that. So if you're going to engage with a corporate partner to activate that, we have a request form process where the student athletes, they go to the compliance when they get the request from a partner to disclose that they're engaging in NIL activity. Then if it's using the university's brand, it comes back into our office to make sure we're able to review it and how they're using it and using it appropriately. So if it's just wearing a t-shirt with our brand on it in their post, our lens is going to be then, I'm going to bring our multimedia rights partner in. Who's that partner? Does that partner invest at the right level to make sure we're not diluting the value of being affiliated through the multimedia rights side by going through the athletes with those social posts? So generally speaking, we put together a brochure to give them kind of a one-sheeter, what's in and what's out as a general overview. And the general guide is, we want to support you, but if you're doing a general post without our brand, in street clothes, in a park, no affiliation with the university, all day long, God bless, go forth and do great things. But once you're using the university's marks, we need to make sure it goes to another level. Are they invested as a partner? And that has come up a couple of times recently. A lot of the companies understand the differences, but some understand and are trying to squeak around, and others want to just, they don't know, so they want to ask the right questions and understand the right way to go about it.
Have you seen it yet happening the other way, where you have a current sponsor who comes to you and says, in addition to all of the activations we're already doing with you, we'd also really like to work with, 1 or 3 or 5 student athletes to engage with us as well? Have you seen it coming from that direction?
Actually, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. Today is actually an interesting day. So Kroger, one of our major corporate partners, headquartered in the area, is doing an event later tonight. It's a pep rally kind of a thing, so it's going to be a lot of visibility around our brand, but it's specifically geared towards all the women student athletes on the athletic department. We think it's the first time it's an athletic department wide for women opportunity as an NIL event at Kroger. So it's going to start at 4:00 this afternoon, so in a couple hours. So it's additional lift to what they're doing. One of our other corporate partners, Skyline, did one with the offensive line last year where they did the block of the week. So they came in, they filmed video clips of the offensive line in the restaurant, but then the team, the linemen would figure out what was the block of the week. And then they would show a little video clip of that on Skyline and on their social media feeds. So there's interesting opportunities like that where those corporate partners that are invested with us want to find ways to engage with the athletes to grow their brand and create different engagement opportunities with our constituency and their brands.
I know you're not an attorney, so I don't know what your answer is going to be to this, but where my mind immediately went with that, particularly talking about the deal with the linemen, is if now you're working on something where it's a university partner and they're coming to you and now they're also wanting to engage with student athletes. We talk a lot about where and if Title IX comes into play with NIL. And I think where universities have to be careful is anytime they are quote unquote involved, as long as it's a company reaching out to the student athlete separately and nobody's talking to anybody in the athletic department, no problem. But as more of this, I think will continue to happen where sponsors are already engaged with the university or the athletic department, and now they also want to engage with several, specific athletes. Have those conversations around Title IX been happening, or do you have any thoughts on that?
We're always thinking about things like that. And it's again back to the communication, that piece. The offensive line thing with Skyline was interesting. The offensive line, they were really engaging. They're the ones that approached Skyline, and Skyline embraced that and wanted to work with them on that. So it's passive. We weren't involved in saying, Skyline, we want you to go do this. The thing with Kroger, that's happening now. That's my understanding. It's more of a passive thing. Kroger wants to do these opportunities. They came in through a different pathway to engage with the student athletes, and they wanted to go embrace the women athletes to make sure that Kroger is supporting that. And then that brought it back to the university, and now we're finding ways to add to it because Kroger is a corporate partner. So instead of just Kroger saying, hey, let's bring all the women's teams down for this event, now it became a bigger thing. So it's the full embracing of the brand that we're having a pep rally around it. So now it's the university, but it started with Kroger or the athletes, and then there's other ways that we can make sure we're supporting it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense at all. I'm not a Title IX expert either, but that passes my smell test. One thing I think you and I have talked about, maybe one of the first times we ever talked, and I don't think I was aware of it, so I think you're the person who sort of taught me this, is that it has traditionally not been uncommon for universities to engage influencers on campus who are non-athletes and to use them to help market the university itself. And it seems pretty clear to me, at least, that universities currently cannot do that with student athletes because the money can't be coming from the university or the athletic department to compensate student athletes for their name, image, and likeness. But I was wondering if you might share just a little brief overview of how universities, or your university in particular, have worked with other students on campus, because I do think it would be nice in the future if student athletes had that opportunity. And I was able to interview NCAA President Mark Emmert a couple of weeks ago. And that's by the time this publishes, a couple of podcast episodes ago, if people missed that. And he talked about how the idea he's a proponent of is making student athletes ambassadors of the university and compensating them as such. And when he was talking about that, I thought, oh, Marty and I have talked about this before. So tell us a little bit about how you've worked with non-athlete students, and then maybe we'll dig into President Emmert's idea.
Sure. Well, we've actually done a little bit of both. So as you and I discussed earlier this summer, we're starting a program where we've actually done it this last year, where we had a variety of influencers of 9 women. They happened to just end up being women. We didn't lean into saying it had to be women, but the first group we selected were 9 women. So a few were current students, a few alums. My team worked with the university's primary social media team to identify general followers that they lean in with, and we just approached them to see if they wanted to give us advice and other ways to support the brand, help elevate women's product opportunities in the marketplace, and then just from their lens and in their voice, talk about their passion and their love of the university and why. So the more information we can give them about what we're doing from a retail merchandising standpoint with licensees or other upcoming events around the university and how the university works, it gives those women more information, those influencers should say, more information about UC, so that they can tell their story about their love for UC in their voice. And then that's the multiplier effect. It gets out to their network, and then that helps evangelize it out. So it's more of a real grassroots effort. We've taken a spin off that, so we've now got a full year of us doing that. And we now launched last month an Embers program with champions. So it's an influencer program where they're champion ambassadors. Hanes Brands is actually paying these individuals. We have 4 of them for engagement, information about the campus, the lifestyle, move-in week. What's the pulse of campus? What are fashion trends? What are popular sayings going on campus? Our key events, just getting a pulse of the student life. And I'm thrilled to note that one of our Embers, the interns with Hanes, is a student athlete. She's on our golf team. So when we go out and look at that from my lens, from a licensing perspective, when you set policies, they're not just about the student athlete. It's about all the students. So, if we're doing something, certainly student athletes have a different platform than other students do. But I've been told we have a student on our campus that has 50,000 followers on TikTok. We've got others that are significantly more engaged on TikTok or Instagram. So they don't have to be an athlete to have a significant amount of following. It's just when they want to use our brand, just like anybody else, we have to make sure we have our right approvals in place to do so.
Right. I don't know. I won't put you on the spot and ask you if you listened to my episode with President Emmert or not, but just to give everybody an overview of his idea, we were talking about whether or not student athletes might be deemed in the future by the National Labor Relations Board to be employees. And he introduced an idea he has for student athletes to be compensated as ambassadors of the university. He acknowledged what many of us have heard about athletics being the front porch of the university, and said that, a way to compensate student athletes might be to compensate them relative to how, if football is on TV X number of times and baseball is on TV X number of times, and you got men's basketball and women's basketball, you start figuring out where the visibility opportunities are, and then you come up with a compensation model that uses some sort of formula based on that media coverage and compensate athletes that way as ambassadors of the university. What are your initial thoughts on that as sort of a broad concept? Obviously, we don't know all the details, but as sort of a starting point.
I love any creative thought to advance the discussion. The devil's going to be in the details of how we do that with equity, and how do we spread that across and make it sustainable over time, big schools, small schools, and everybody in between. That's going to be the hard part about trying to do all this. I do have concerns once they become employees, and I think I did listen. I was there. So I understand the challenges once they become employees. Now it becomes a whole other thing, Title IX versus not, and how do you manage that? But I love the creative thought about looking at ways to expand upon this. Anything that we can do for any of our students that can help them with affordability and engagement and creating the right culture on campus, I think it's a fantastic way to help hopefully address the stresses and the mental health issues that are out there. Instead of social media bullying everybody or shaming everybody into different things, if we have these wonderful people that are out there in a positive voice and a positive experience with the campus community and welcoming people, making them feel safe and wanted to be here, that's a huge impact for our brand. And then if it helps them with their profile and grow as well, the more we can help their profile grow, they become, if they're really good at being influencers, other brands are going to find them and pay them to create pathways for that. It's not for everybody. Some people don't have the time or the bandwidth or want to listen to the chaos that comes from social media. So it may not be for everybody. That's the only other danger with this is if you look at that, how do we apply with equity with all the student athletes? So I think it's all going to be in the devil in the details, but I love the thought. I love the way it creates different conversations for us to continue looking at how to expand these opportunities.
Yeah, I feel the same way you do. I like that outside of the box thinking, and I like it as a starting point. And, where does it go from here and how do we start fleshing that out? So hopefully it's an idea that gets discussed a little more. I think I'm going to have an opportunity to talk to President Emmert about it again. You hear it the first time, and then I came home and I was editing the audio and the video from the event that I had live at University of Florida. And I thought of 10 more questions I wish I had asked him. But in the moment, I was so caught off guard because he's never talked about that idea before. I had no idea he was going to say that. So I wasn't prepared with questions to ask. And so I came home and sort of thought, gosh, there are like 10 things. And the more I think about it, obviously, the more questions I have. So hopefully I'll get a second opportunity to chat with him about that soon. I will keep everyone posted on that. You guys will be the first to know. I did want to go back to something else you mentioned. You talked about the work with Hanes brand, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess because I know you guys are partners with the Brandar Group. Was that done through them?
No, this was posted through a handshake. This was completely outside. It could be any student on campus. I notified athletics, so we reached out to some of our colleagues in athletics to make sure they knew that this was available for students. It's basically a couple hours a month. They post the program is they have to post a couple pictures and provide feedback on fashion and images, key settings around the Cincinnati, obviously on campus as well. And then styling choices, what's popular and trend wise, what do they see, what kids are talking about, what's in the news, what's current events, things like that are resonating with them. So then the design team at Hanes and Champion can start working on new graphics or other ways to do modeling or present things and provide line runs relevant to retailers. So we're being responsive to what the needs are of the community rather than just the fashion people in New York or whoever making decisions and then try to fit it for everybody in a one big box. So we put it out there on Handshake. It was just a matter of making sure the student athletes were aware of it and had the opportunity to apply for it. And again, it's passive. I wasn't involved in the review, the interviews, and selecting who they were. Hanes is moving forward with it. So it's an NIL thing, but it's an NIL thing for any of them. It's just a general influencer program. So it's kind of like Pink has the Pink Campus Ambassadors, or the other ones like that, but it's that a little bit more on steroids because we just had a meeting with the Embers team last month, our September meeting. I was the keynote for that one, talking about the licensing industry and the sponsorship industry, and so they can understand that. So in addition to providing brand influence and talking about Champion on their social feeds, they're learning about the licensing business and the university business, the sales side of the business, the merchandising side of the business. In each month that we're going to have a different topic. So they're getting paid for a couple hours worth of work. Plus they're learning a lot about this and they're making great relationships with the team at Hanes. So if this goes well, it could lead to potential other opportunities with them or others. It could be an agency job because you know more about the business. It could be working for another licensee or a retailer, quite frankly.
That's great. I asked because I know the Brandar Group has gone in at quite a few schools now and done group licensing kind of deals, less like this ambassador model and more like group licensing with Hanes brand. So I knew that was one of the partners that they work with all the time. How much are you involved with what the Brandar Group is doing there from a group licensing perspective? Does that run more through athletics or does that touch what you do as well?
It's a little bit of both. So I was involved with athletics when they submitted the contract to partner with Brandar. And I work with our council. Anytime a contract comes through campus that involves the brand and reaches our council office, they make sure I'm involved and we're making sure we're aligned on what the use of the brand is and how we're documenting the contract. I've got a lot of really strong connections with our colleagues at Brandar, so I'm on regular meetings with them. Actually, just a couple of days ago, sent them a list of all of our licensees that have been approved for NIL activities so that we can make sure they have those as they get education sessions set up with the athletes to understand what the potential opportunities are. I also work with our colleagues from One Team Partners as well, so we have a little bit of both. But One Team doesn't sign agreements with the universities, whereas Brandar does. Brandar is trying to engage specifically. We've also engaged through athletics, Altius partners, Altius Sports. So we're going to have a GMs dedicated to NIL through Altius to help us tie the dots. So that person's going to work with me, athletics, Brandar, and our multimedia rights partner to make sure when these opportunities come up, it's a little bit easier process for us to make sure we're all talking together and kind of knocking down walls and engaging with opportunities as they come through.
And for those who are listening who aren't as familiar with the Brandar Group, I will link a previous episode I did last year with Wesley from the Brandar Group. And I've been asking him to come back on and do a second episode because we were talking in the really early days of him signing schools last year. And now they've signed so many and have done so much group licensing work that I said he had to come back with me again this school year and talk about sort of the first year of NIL. So hopefully we'll have him on soon to update us. But I'm curious from your perspective there on campus, how have your licensees reacted to the opportunity for group licensing and getting to work directly with student athletes in that way?
They love it. It's still a challenge for them. So like with Haynes, they're embracing the opportunity. Nobody knows really for sure what everybody's going to want. We actually had a licensing summit back in June, and we have a focus group, some of our influencers, some of our fan council, and a few other people. And we did surveys, and one of the questions was, what do you look for? Would you buy a t-shirt with a student athlete? And it's interesting. Some of the fans in the fan group have said, yes, they absolutely want to do that to support the athlete. But we've also had feedback that, no, not for me, because the athlete's going to come and they're going to go. But for my kid, my son or my daughter, sure, because they're going to grow out of their shirt in 3 months. So it's going to be hard to see it'll be interesting seeing how that plays out over time. And that's one of the interesting parts that the licensees are still struggling with. How they choose which athlete to go forward with and which ones they don't. So from a licensing perspective, I've been leaning hard on our partners to make sure the market will dictate which ones sell. That's not for me to decide or the licensee to decide necessarily, or quite frankly, the retailer. It'll be the consumers. I just want to make sure our licensees are prepared to engage and provide opportunities for all of our student athletes. I don't want them to just cherry pick and come in and say, we're only going to pick the revenue sports that we know that are going to get a lot of visibility. I want licensees that are going to commit to the university, our brand, and provide opportunities for all the athletes if they're interested.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious as I hear you talk more about the stuff that you do on a daily basis and all the different people you're interfacing with. Could you maybe share? We have a lot of younger administrators and even students and grad students who listen to the podcast. Could you tell them a little bit about your career path and how you ended up in this position?
Most people in licensing never started out saying, I want to get in licensing.
Something people graduate with a passion for.
Right. There may be now a future person that will come up that way and say that was been my goal all along. I'm a finance guy by trade. So I graduated, I'm a finance degree. I started in investment advisory business. I ended up coming into the university because back in the day, companies were coming in and buying firms and moving jobs all over the place. And my wife was an alum. She's just retired last year after a long career at the hospital doing nursing. And I felt like I want to still do business. I want to do something that's important and makes a meaningful impact in the world. So instead of worrying about job changes and whatnot, we got a job on the university side, more on the research side of the business. And I knew I'd be able to graduate in different partnerships and grow within the business space. So work for the research side, ended up managing a clinical department for a little while, then moved over in the intellectual property office. And once I got into the intellectual property office, licensing research technologies, putting together the business plans there, the university had licensing in the council's office, and they wanted to get it out of there because councils are just like no and very tightly managed on things. And they wanted to find a way to grow and activate the brand from a business perspective and grow it with partnerships. So they moved it over to the intellectual property office. My boss at the time was Ann Chasser. She started the program at Ohio State. She wanted me to, she's like, I know a guy that in my team that can do it. And she asked me to take over, and I've been doing that ever since. And it got so busy after the first year, I had to kind of let go of the technology licensing and just focus on managing the brand and trademark licensing.
if there is someone sitting out there listening who is super enthusiastic about this, I mean, as a law student, I was very interested in intellectual property. I just don't know a whole lot of non-lawyers who are interested in it. But if there are some folks out there who are there any skills or types of jobs you would recommend for them in those early years of their career to set themselves on the right path and have the right toolkit for what you do?
I think the biggest thing is understand relationship management. And every job ultimately we're a people industry, everything we do. So the more you can understand and then just think globally, that's a hard discipline to get because most people just get in the routine. Try to think globally and all the connection points that you can touch on. Because licensing involves design, art, fashion trends. I'm not the fashionista, but I understand enough a way that I'm not the guy. When I look at artwork, I'm looking at to make sure the logo is used properly, not would I buy that? Who would buy that? I'll let the consumers decide that. You have to be good at marketing and communication and how you engage with your wider constituency. Business development. That's been one of the biggest growths and challenges in our industry, besides the supply chain issues that came from the pandemic, but supply chain, sustainability, how are our products sourced and manufactured and where they come to the world? Is it a stable production cycle and landing product in the marketplace? Distribution and sales. You have to be able to work with different salespeople to make sure you're articulating the values of your brand and why people want to be affiliated with that. So I think those are the top things. From a contractual standpoint, like a legal side, understanding contracts. And you can put terms in place, but understanding what the business side of the contract is. So I'm happy I'm not a lawyer because the lawyers are generally like, what do you need to be protected within the law? Businesses, how do you make it work? And so you have to understand the general terms of a contract, because I do manage some of the contracts on campus, but understand how you use the IP and do it in a way that can allow both sides to win and grow opportunities. I think those would be the biggest things to think. Try to think globally and look at those different core tenets.
My students, who I am going to force to listen to this, which I think is a fascinating subject, and hopefully they will too, but they are going to remember the contracts module that we already had to do. And this is why we had to do it, because contracts are the foundation of so many different things in sports. And I teach both sports media law and an NIL class. Contracts are integral to both of those classes. And even if they don't want to go on to law school, I'm trying to give them that basic foundation, because you're going to come across contracts no matter what area you work in. And I tell people all the time, I'm glad I went to law school because I know how to read a contract, and I know how to look at a will. I know what I'm doing when I'm signing a real estate contract. I know how to look at it and get the basics and make sure I'm protected and that I'm not giving away something I don't mean to give away. And so I think they all rolled their eyes when I made them learn about contracts for an entire module. But maybe now they're starting to see it's tying into every other thing we're learning for the rest of the semester.
And honestly, that's kind of how I graduated into it. When I was in finance, part of what I did early on was I was working with a lot of clients on estates and trusts. So there was a lot of lawyers and engaging with that. So I learned how they did that. When I went over into the research side, it's contracts based on research applications and grants and proposals. Then I went over to IP and technology licensing, those contracts related to that. So along the way, I learned a lot about contracting, and as well as how do you do sales, and then how do you do relationships. So those are the skills that help me be effective at what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I think it really is one of those positions that pulls in a lot of other areas. And your background is very different than some of the other folks I've met like you who are in similar positions at other universities, because I think there are a lot of different ways to sort of move into this licensing and sponsorship type role. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit more of that with everybody. I wanted to close out by asking you, what are some trends in your part of the industry that you're keeping an eye on that you think will shape the future of your position and the people that come after you?
Well, it's two fronts. So I think from a sponsorship side, it's activating against the university brand, not just the athletic side of it. Is how do we find the touch points? Because companies are trying to find different ways to engage with that demographic, the student demographic, but it also leads beyond just that. There are brands that want to affiliate with the faculty and the staff because they know they've got the disposable income to spend money now. Whereas students, it's an interesting animal because on move-in week, companies want to be involved. Banks, they still want to do the credit cards, but they want to be your bank, because when you sign up with a bank, the chances of you not being with that bank forever, you're going to have a significant oops on the bank side to get someone who want to switch to a different bank. So they're trying to get access to you right now, and they get a little bit better engagement on the institutional side rather than just the athletic department side, because they're with you on a daily basis on campus. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of growth potential there from real estate. Even how do you faculty staff to move? Who's your real estate partner, and getting those. So that's interesting, in trying to understand access and value to the brand on the more broader institutional side. From a licensing standpoint, it's interesting because the world's kind of evolved. It used to be early on, a lot of the retailers would pre-book orders and then chase the schools that were hot. Then we got really good at data analytics and supply chains and things like that. So it kind of shrinked. They stopped pre-booking a lot and they started chasing a lot because more on-time demand and ordering. It's since the pandemic, people almost flipped and gone back to make sure they have product in market. So I think the bigger picture on that side is the licensing piece is focused on data analytics and understanding the numbers and how you get numbers and where you source numbers and what it means to your brand and how you multiply that out and set a path strategically to grow your brand going forward.
It's such a good podcast to have to follow. Last week's podcast, by the time this comes out, which was with Steve Hank from AffiniQuest, and that was all about using data for fan engagement and increasing revenue streams in athletic departments through that. So we're really going to hit everybody over the head with the importance of data analytics between these two episodes.
The hard part, though, once you get all the numbers, is don't get analysis paralysis. You really have to interpret the numbers and make them move.
And what I have found, it's what I enjoy the most about sports business reporting, is analyzing the data. And when I was at ESPN, I think they even talked about the people in my division being data-driven reporters, was what they called us. But the dangerous thing I found with that too is you can almost always find the data to support whatever opinion you want to put out there. You can really put on blinders and only look at this little segment of it and say, see, here's the proof, my idea works. So how do you keep that from happening? How do you make sure you're looking at the data in a way that you're not being biased towards any one outcome?
You have to, again, back to my thought of, you have to try and always look at everything with a global lens. And what's the impact on one decision and on everything else? Now, you can't let that weigh you down and stop you from making decisions. You just have to always be adaptive and learn and grow and listen a lot. Listen to what it means to the different constituents on campus, and then try to see what's in the best interest globally for the overall brand. When we look at it, we're an institution of 48,000 students, but between the university and our healthcare affiliate, UC Health, we represent the largest employee base in the city of Cincinnati. So almost 21,000 employees. So add those numbers together and you start seeing the multiplier effect. So 21,000 employees, it's the employee, their spouse, their kids, 48,000 students and their parents, grandparents, and, aunts and uncles. It becomes a huge, huge effect. It's not just the alumni base, which is huge, but it's not just the alumni base. It's not just we have 45,000 people in the football stadium on a game day weekend. Our brand's bigger than that. So when I always talk about, I look at the constituency and have to think of it in that lens of look at the numbers and where the trend lines are going and where the business world is going, and then see how do you make it fit and it adapts with that larger group, because we're always trying to grow that group. We want to look at our brand as a family. We want to welcome people into it, and we want that tent to be open to continue growing.
I think that's great advice. I could talk to you all day, but I know you have other things you need to go do. So thank you for spending a little time with us here. You've got it, for those who are watching this on video, you've got your username up on the screen, but why don't you tell people the best place to connect with you if they want to follow up after this?
Best way to get me with my email address for work is my name, martin.ludwig@uc.edu, or you can reach out to me on Twitter @mludwiguc, and that'll be a good way to reach out to me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marty. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Marty for stopping by and joining us here on the Business of College Sports podcast. I hope you learned a lot about where we're at with trademarks and licensing and current issues, especially with NIL and group licensing. Marty is just a wealth of information, and I could have talked to him for hours longer about this, but we will just have to have him back again sometime. Thank you for listening to or watching the Business of College Sports podcast. I would love for you to take time to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform, or if you're watching us here on YouTube, to like and subscribe to our video. We are new here on YouTube and are trying to grow our presence, and I'm so appreciative for those of you who show up and listen to or watch the podcast. Thank you for your support. It means the world to me, and I look forward to bringing you another great guest next week.